Criminal defense lawyers of Reddit, who's the most disturbing potential client you've come across? Story 1 Public defender recounts defending a serial assailant who unnerved her by shaking his leg, a known precursor to his attacks, during their meeting. My tutor had to defend one of the few serial assailants who was currently being held in prison at Her Majesty's pleasure, legal term in the UK for saying their sentence is indefinite. She said when she had to go in for conference he kept saying when she got him acquitted he'd take her out. Halfway through he starts shaking his leg, and the court officers immediately rushed in and pulled her out. Apparently he starts shaking his leg before he's about to attack someone. It was later found out he did it just to mess with her. She did have to defend him, but that because in the UK they practice the cab rank rule, meaning ethically you cannot refuse a client if they meet certain requirements. Story 2 Criminal defense lawyer describes a client who beat his girlfriend with a lamp and held a knife to her neck, displaying no remorse and unsettling behavior. I had a client once who had beaten his girlfriend with a lamp and also held a massive carving knife to her neck. He was super cheerful and friendly towards me, but it was clearly an act. He had no sense of personal space, no apparent remorse, and he hardly ever blinked. I did try to represent him, but he did a runner and I never heard from him again. Edit. Did a runner equals skipped town. Story 3 Lawyer shares experience defending a schizophrenic woman who caused fatal injuries to her mother, highlighting the severity of her mental illness and the legal outcome. Schizophrenic woman off her meds caused fatal injuries to her mother with a hammer. It was disturbing in the sense at just how tiny this woman was, but the damage shown in the photos was unreal. Her recollection of events was pretty candid and clear. 2. Yes, it was my job. It is not my job to decide who gets access to justice and who does not. Not guilty of harm, but was convicted by a majority of 5-2 of the jurors of manslaughter on the basis of diminished responsibility, but not insanity. All 4 of the psychiatrists giving evidence at trial agreed she suffered from severe schizophrenia/paranoid schizophrenia. They also agreed that the defendant's prognosis was very uncertain, as she has had a history of relapses and unsatisfactory drug treatment compliance. So she will potentially remain a danger to the community. Court issued a hospital order admitting/detaining her in a psychiatric center run by Correctional Services Department that is institutionalized for an indefinite period. This is public record, so no confidentiality breached. Story 4 Filipino lawyer recounts being misled by a client accused of slight physical injury who omitted key details seen on CCTV, teaching the lawyer to be more vigilant. Filipino lawyer: I had this young client whom I represented pro bono. Case is slight physical injury, and he was the accused. When I interviewed him, he said the plaintiff started the confrontation. They said they just hit them out of self-defense. But I saw the CCTV of the event. He failed to mention that he took a piece of wood and hit it with the victim. I felt tricked. At least it taught me a lesson to be more vigilant. Yes, I am still defending them, but I hope for it to dismiss. They are hard clients. Story 5 Immigration defense lawyer was assigned to argue against deporting a man who severely burned a toddler's hands under hot water, finding the act deeply disturbing. I used to practice immigration defense, and as the junior associate I had to take whatever cases the partners assigned me. I had to write a brief arguing why a guy in prison for aggravated battery to a child under 4 shouldn't be deported after his prison sentence. He went to prison because while he was babysitting his girlfriend's 2-year-old daughter, she wouldn't stop crying, so he held her hands under extremely hot water from the faucet. As a punishment, I guess. The little girl ended up disfigured with severe burns up both her arms. I had to make an argument about the crime charged not being an aggravated felony for immigration purposes. Story 6 Lawyer recounts defending a man who caused fatal injuries to his grandmother with a bread knife, leading to lifelong institutionalization. For me, it was the guy who caused fatal injuries to his grandma with a bread knife. I had to interview him in his cell, because it was too dangerous to move him to visitation. He was tiny, looked like Charlie Manson. He'll never get to trial. It's mental hospitals forever for this sad, sick man. Story 7 Lawyer watches horrific harm videos during internship, realizes client was involved in brutal killings. Eat it. Very disturbing content warning. Even though I've made a throwaway, I'm going to be a bit vague, because I still take my ethical duties to former clients seriously and can't breach privilege or the NDA I signed. This is a story from a long time ago, during the summer, after my first year of law school, when I was briefly working at a well-known criminal defense firm. The client whose case I was working was one of several defendants charged with conspiracy to commit harm. 3 individuals had committed the harms, and several others had either helped plan it, abducted the victims, came along to watch, or filmed it. In order to see whether our client was one of the individuals present at the scene, I had to watch multiple videos of the harms. I watched multiple people brutally killed in about the worst possible way you can imagine. They were chopped into pieces while they were alive and had their skulls stomped in. It wasn't some grainy security footage. It was HD video taken by bystanders just a few feet away. The video showed someone's brain squirting out of their head and another person screaming as their hands and arms were hacked off. I also had to listen to the audio to see if our client's voice could be heard. The screams were bad. The laughter was worse. It has stuck with me for years and years, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. Thankfully, my internship at that firm ended a few weeks later at the end of the summer. I never looked up the sentence from the case, and have no desire to. In our case, there was no presumption of innocence. The individuals involved had all taken pleas in hope that the prosecutors wouldn't seek the death penalty. The only thing that would change was whether our client would get the death penalty, if he was present/filming, or life in prison, if we showed that he played a more minimal role. Working in criminal defense meant setting my judgment for people aside so that they could be afforded the rights guaranteed to them by the Constitution. I still did my job to the best of my ability, but I found myself lying awake at night for several weeks in a row, praying to every god that I knew that each of those motherfuckers involved would fry in the electric chair, and that someone would laugh at their screams too. After that internship, I never returned to criminal law. I now practice civil law where I help people recover for wrongs done to them. Story 8. Lawyer hears 911 call of client slitting victim's throat. Realizes client's guilt during the disturbing audio. I listened to a 911 call where the victim's throat was slit while on the call by our client. I will never forget her gurgling and sounding like she was dying. Somehow she ultimately lived through this, saying, "He killed me, he killed me." Story 9. Lawyer views child exploitation evidence. Realizes client distributed images of his own baby and neighbor's children. When I had to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office to view the evidence in his case, there they were, the hundreds of images of child exploitation he had traded, the close-up images of his baby's private areas that he had taken and sent around the internet, the pictures of his neighbor's daughters playing in their kiddie pool. Realized he just could not help himself. But he also never once claimed responsibility or showed remorse, so I don't feel too badly for him. Story 10. Paralegal realizes client's monstrosity when reading child's statement about ignored abuse. I work as a paralegal for a criminal defense attorney who takes a lot of court appointments. The case that sticks out in my mind would be Jordan's. Not her real name. Jordan was really personable, and I was almost sold on her innocence until we received discovery. She was charged with multiple counts of child abuse/neglect. Her boyfriend was harming her daughter. Her daughter told Jordan what was going on multiple times, but finally stopped reporting the abuse because her mom would slap her and call her a liar. This girl lived in absolute hell for years because her mother would rather have a man than be alone. The boyfriend would take the child to school each day and make her perform acts on him before he dropped her off. I read the child's statement these incidents out loud to Jordan. She responded, "I was molested when I was little too," as if it's something that just happens. Fuck that. Coent. Story 11. Legal aid worker encounters delusional individual defending his relationship with a 6-year-old. I did legal aid in prisons for a few years and encountered a lot of disturbed inmates, but 2 of them will always stick in my mind. The first was a giant biker meth cook who had survived several meth lab explosions. The first day we met, he came into the attorney/client room in a long-sleeve button-down, and made a big production of slowly taking it off to reveal a patchwork of scarring, skin grafts and prison tattoos like I had never seen, and hoped to never see again. My dad was a burn victim, so I'm not squeamish about scars and grafts, but this guy's whole body looked like it was patched together from the bodies of several different guys, and it was quite a sight, especially the fresher tattoos. I can still picture it clearly when I close my eyes. The worst, though, were the individuals. We got a hugely disproportionate number of child harm criminals, because so many of them were middle to upper-class guys who were accustomed to filling out paperwork and utilizing public services, as opposed to the poor kids who got tangled up in substances and gangs who found our application paperwork too daunting. They were all terrible, but one of them was the absolute creepiest person I've ever encountered. He was formerly very wealthy and was trying to defend the last of his assets against a personal injury case filed by the parents of one of his victims. His defense was that he and his 6-year-old victim were in love, and nobody else was capable of understanding their relationship but the two of them. He was so delusional and so defensive, it was the only time I ever had to put my hands on an inmate, because he got up in my face when I said I wouldn't and couldn't offer that defense in a pleading. He was completely calm and reasonable while discussing this absolutely atrocious relationship, but as soon as I challenged it, it was like he flipped a switch and I could physically sense the violence and rage radiating off of him. I dealt with all kinds of terrible criminals during that period, but he was the only genuine serial killer type monster that I ever ran into. Story 12. Prosecutor horrified by woman who starved, adopted children twice, justifying it as helping them. As a prosecutor, I worked on a case where a defendant, after serving time for starving 3 adopted children to hospitalization, married a man with children and started starving them too. Her interview, justifying her actions as helping them be healthy and beautiful, disturbed me more than any harm case. The first set of kids looked like Holocaust survivors, brainwashed to think only she loved them. She had been convicted once before for the exact same thing, served her time, got out, met a guy with kids, married him, and immediately started starving his kids too. In her interview, she explained that she was helping them be healthy and beautiful. She was so matter-of-fact about it. That disturbed me more than any of the harms I've prosecuted. Story 13. New lawyer catalogs 4,000 child exploitation files, uncovering clients' assaults on minors. In my first week at a criminal defense firm, I cataloged discovery from our client's phone, finding 4,000 videos and photos of women under 16, many barely pubescent, being prostituted for substances. One video showed him forcing himself on a child high on substances, choking her, claiming he loved her. He also taped girls having intimacy at hotels. It was horrifying, and I realized his monstrous nature. The client was charged with trafficking minors, and we had to go through all the discovery to make sure the police didn't violate any of his rights. The sheer volume was overwhelming, and the content was soul-crushing. Story 14. Lawyer disturbed by teen client who randomly caused fatal injuries and dismembered his girlfriend in a corn silo. Doing prison legal aid, I represented a 17-year-old with brain trauma, raised by a great foster family, popular at school. He invited his girlfriend to a corn silo, and by his account, for no reason, he bashed her skull with a 2x4, chopped her body with farm tools, buried her, and went home. Reading the pre-sentence report, I realized some people are just fundamentally messed up, and he was one of them. There was no motive, no anger, just a sudden urge. It chilled me to the core. Story 15. Former lawyer quits after defending clients in a cannibalistic orgy harm case. My high school teacher, a former lawyer, shared his last case defending 2 couples who, during a drunken, substance-fueled orgy, decided to cause fatal injuries, partially eat, and dismember one of the women. He had to deal with the horrid details, pictures, and their reasoning, like, she wasn't right. The experience left him with a far-off look, and he quit law to teach, haunted by their monstrous actions. The details were so graphic that even recounting it years later made him pause. Story 16. Client refuses to pay medical bills for girlfriend he paralyzed by throwing her out a window, showing no remorse. Representing a client accused of domestic violence, I learned he threw his girlfriend out a second-story window, causing paralysis. During settlement talks for her medical bills, he refused to pay, saying, quote, "She's not my problem anymore," revealing his lack of remorse and monstrous character. It was at that moment I knew he was beyond redemption. Story 17. Defense attorney deals with client who beat and starved his elderly mother for inheritance. I had a client charged with elder abuse. He had beaten and starved his elderly mother to force her to sign over her house to him. When I asked why, he said, "She lived long enough, it was my turn." No regret, just entitlement. The photos of her emaciated body were heartbreaking. Story 18. Lawyer, horrified by client's casual confession to multiple unreported child assaults. During an interview, my client, accused of one count of child molestation, casually mentioned he had done it to, quote, "at least a dozen others, but they never reported." He laughed about it, saying kids are easy to scare silent. That was when I saw the true monster. Story 19. Paralegal uncovers client's plot to cause harm to witnesses in his own case. Working on a harm defense, I found notes in the client's file where he was planning to have witnesses harmed from jail. He wrote it like a shopping list. When confronted, he shrugged and said, "Loose ends. Pure evil." Story 20. Public defender encounters client with no remorse after shooting teen over insult. About 18 years ago, I represented a man who was homeless and was insane. He thought there was a website that said he had intimacy with his sister, and everyone on earth knew it. He lived in his car but kept his shampoo in a locked box in the trunk so no one would put poison in it. Slightly paranoid individual. He was at a sandwich shop across from a trauma hospital, fortunately. The 17-year-old kid behind the counter said something to the effect that he was a crazy motherfucker. The client went to his car, got a .38 special and chased the kid, shooting him in the back twice. Fortunately, the hospital was close, and the kid survived. But he lost a kidney, I think. I remember the kid and a bullet went through an organ. I sent my client to the VA for a psych eval. I got a call from his psychiatrist, stating under no circumstances should my client be out on the streets. I asked where he was, and she, the psychiatrist, said he was discharged and left the VA. I provided her with the paperwork to file an involuntary commitment where the client would be sent to the state mental hospital. As his lawyer, I was not able to do so because of attorney-client privilege. I was prohibited from testifying as to what the client said to me. The psychiatrist did not file the paperwork but issued a letter stating he was not competent. The client continued to walk the streets in his paranoid state. My client pleaded insanity and eventually pleaded guilty to a felony aggravated battery, but the gun was removed from the charge. If convicted with the gun being part of the charge, the client would have automatically gone to prison. It was his first offense. He got probation. My client had no remorse for shooting the kid. Client kept complaining that the kid said the client FC ked his sister. These were the client's own words during sentencing. Client acted like the victim the entire sentencing. Once probation was graded, the client wrote a bar complaint against me because he was convicted of a crime. I received a letter from the bar, addressed to the client, closing the case without further review. Fortunately, I have not seen him since. He has probably passed away now. He was in his 70s then. Story 21. Defending a serial child assailant with juvenile offenses. As a law clerk at a criminal defense firm, I worked on cases on appeal after clients had pled guilty or been found guilty. One client was a convicted serial child assailant, but some offenses occurred when he was a juvenile, treated differently under law. I had to go through paperwork to figure out which victims he harmed as an adult versus juvenile for punishment calculation. Court documents used pseudonyms like John Doe, while police reports had real names, with no index to match them. I had to match victims to code names using biographical details in abuse accounts, like, Child A is black, around age 9, touched around private areas with fingers. Alex is black, matches time frame but report mentions tongue, not fingers. I believe 90% chance Child A is Alex. I'm glad to be moving into prosecution soon. Story 22, representing a man who harmed his daughters and cared for a disabled granddaughter. In immigration law, intersecting with criminal defense, I had to argue for a man convicted of harming his young daughters aged 6 to 8 to enter my country to care for his disabled step-granddaughter. Reading the details was horrifying. The now adult daughters wrote letters forgiving him and trusting him with their children. I couldn't stop thinking about him being alone with a little girl who couldn't move or talk, defenseless against a convicted individual. Another case involved a man with a felony for threatening to cause harm to his previous attorney, needing to clear it for a job. He sent a bizarre manifesto about government conspiracies and girly men in power, making me fear I'd be his next target due to his untreated mental health issues. Story 23. Handling a case of a man beating his partner to death. As a lawyer doing criminal work experience, I was part of the legal team defending a man who killed his partner by beating her to death with his fists in their living room. We argued diminished responsibility, claiming he lacked mental capacity for harm, only guilty of manslaughter. The jury found against him, and he got 25 years. Last thing he said was hoping to go solitary with his guitar, aiming to be better than Eric Clapton by release. This was a UK case. He had psychological issues, but the jury believed he intended serious harm, the mens rea for harm. Story 24. Defending a client who harmed his daughters over years. My client harmed his daughters over a period of years, and it went to a full jury trial. Cross-examining the children was very unpleasant, and the evidence was overwhelming. I made clear before trial he was going down, but he wouldn't take a plea. The judge, in an unrecorded discussion with the prosecutor and me while the jury was out, told us to ensure no appealable issues, calling him a monster. I hated every minute, but did my utmost to represent him, ensuring a fair trial despite the disturbing nature of the case. Story 25. Working on research involving accidental intimate injury. Due to confidentiality, no details, but I had to work on a file doing research on whether accidental intimate injury, like wrong area, is possible, and if it could result in a tissue tear. Short answers. Yes. Risk factors include inexperience, inebriation, and darkness. And yes, rare cases of consensual intimacy caused it. The research was disturbing, hoping the image doesn't hit at an inopportune moment, given the graphic nature of the inquiry. Story 26. Defending an 11-year-old charged with forcible act. As a public defender, I once represented an 11-year-old charged with forcible act against another 11-year-old, rare for such young juvenile defendants. Kids are often charged with harming peers, but this was different. Sometimes parents overreact to, playing doctor. Sometimes it shows the kids were harmed by adults. Juvenile cases are complicated. Juvenile cases absurdly so, with draconian laws not designed for kids, competency issues. Story 27. Defending a violent client desensitized me to violence. Some days it's really hard. Defending violent people that have harmed others has desensitized me to violence. I can read reports, see pictures, and interview victims with little or no emotional reaction. I've found it's a different feeling when assigned cases by the public defender versus meeting with people accused of crimes and taking a lot of their money to represent them. I don't take clients that have hurt kids anymore. A couple in a row messed me up and I can't compartmentalize my emotions from really analyzing the case. Story 28. The would-be serial harm doer made me cynical about authority. Then there was the would-be serial harm doer, who was in psychiatric detention, and if he wasn't kept pretty permanently sedated, would have harmed pretty much anyone he came into physical contact with. Think Hannibal Lecter, but only capable of communicating in angry grunts and with a habit of smearing himself with his own waste and blood. He's from another country, so the government's plan was basically to deport this guy so he's no longer a threat, which is totally understandable. What is not understandable was that the plan was to basically dump him at a random airport in Morocco and run away without telling anyone that's what they'd done. Someone had pointed out that this would probably mean he would start a harm rampage as soon as the substances wore off. Someone in authority had said something like, "Yeah, probably, but if he does, at least it's not our problem." This made me feel very cynical and realize that basically all social structures are about getting rid of your own problems and no one in power or otherwise actually gives a fuck. Story 29. Deposing an 11-year-old assault victim was terrible. I'll defend anyone, and I believe in the universal right to a competent defense. However, certain crimes make me sick. I had to recently depose, ask questions under oath, an 11-year-old girl who says my client assaulted her. It was terrible having to ask her intimate-type questions. No child should have to discuss that type of stuff. Not in a courtroom. The deposition took place in a private room at the Children's Counseling Center. However, the judge, prosecutor, and I agreed that for trial, she will be allowed to testify via closed-circuit television. Story 30. Shadowing a DA during a child harm case. I was shadowing the district attorney for a summer during college when a woman in town set her home on fire with her 2 children inside, resulting in both deaths. I had to climb onto the roof to get into the girl's bedroom, and police said they found both kids, ages 8 and 2, in the same bed, meaning they were awake and terrified during the fire. The neighbor, a police officer, tried to save them but couldn't, and I went to the autopsies, getting dizzy and leaving the room. The mom pleaded out to avoid the death penalty and will be in prison for life. It was traumatizing, and I decided against criminal law after that. Story 31. Representing an individual in an excessive force case. We took on a pro se plaintiff suing cops for excessive force after a high-speed chase, applying the principle of not turning down a federal judge. During the interview, he mentioned harming a girl in college while on substances, spending 10 years in jail for it. He also admitted to being on substances during the chase, not volunteering it earlier. We got him a nice settlement, but later he was on the state's most wanted list. It was hard to support him knowing his history, and his substance use made his claims questionable. Story 32. Child witness denies harm in court. I had to call a 9-year-old as a witness to testify about her father harming her at 7, with DVDs of forensic interviews where she admitted he touched her private area, made her touch him, and substance came out. We prepped with social workers and her mom, but on the stand, she denied everything, despite rephrasing questions. Her father smiled at counsel table, and we lost. Maybe he didn't do it, but I'll never know. It was a tough day, seeing her recant under pressure. Story 33. Defending a man who beat his pregnant girlfriend. I worked as a paralegal on a case defending a man in prison for domestic assault, considered double attempted harm. He beat his pregnant girlfriend to terminate the pregnancy, but she and the fetus survived. We had love letters from her, translated by me, where she prayed for his release and wanted to name the baby after him, despite him hospitalizing her. It made me hate my job a bit, and that's why I don't do criminal law now, working with domestic abuse victims on reduced fees instead. Story 34. Landlords' fraudulent evictions and theft. This happened when I worked in a firm many moons ago. Our clients sued their landlord who changed locks, evicted them for no reason, stole most of their stuff, and had goons dump the rest on the street. He perjured himself in court about damages and rent owed, using a friend as a process server to lie about serving them, getting massive default judgments. We found he filed at least 100 lawsuits like this since the early 90s. It was enraging, and these people lost everything due to his ruthless exploitation of the system. Story 35. Bar fight ends in unprosecuted harm. I assisted a partner on a case involving a man killed in a bar fight at an upscale brew pub. The guy tried to pull his friend out of a fight with drunk fraternity guys, but had his throat cut, dying in front of his sister, who was heartbroken, and he had a young son. Autopsy photos were disturbing, and everyone knew the individual, a fraternity guy, but there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. Our investigator was certain, but the individual went free, and it was frightening someone could get away with harm. Story 36. Teacher harms student over years with threats. I acted for a school's insurer in a case where a male school teacher harmed the same boy from age 13 to 16 regularly, threatening to ruin his family and younger brother if he told. The school had been warned about him previously but did nothing. We cut a large check, and he went to prison for an extended stay. The boy's fear and the school's negligence highlighted the monstrous behavior, and it was a disturbing case to handle. Story 37. Mother forces young sons to sleep outside. I worked as a legal assistant on a case where the mother, our client, forced her 3- and 5-year-old sons to sleep outside on the front porch while she partied indoors, next to a busy road with coal trucks passing all night. The kids were found by neighbors in the morning, cold and scared, and CPS got involved. She showed no remorse, claiming it built character, and fought for custody by lying about abuse from the father. It was heartbreaking to see how she treated her own children like nuisances. Story 38. Defense lawyer disturbed by client's chilling confidence that his abused wife won't testify, hinting at possible foul play. Had a client who was charged with assault with a deadly weapon against his wife. He had a few past charges that were similar, fairly typical domestic violence situation. He claimed it was blown out of proportion, yada yada. I got a pretty good plea deal for him and advised him to take it. He told me he wanted to go to trial. I told him that when his wife testifies against him, he'd lose pretty fast. He looked me in the eye and told me that his wife would not be attending the trial. I knew better than to ask questions. Sure enough, his wife did not attend the trial. Case dismissed for lack of witness. A win for the good guys? I hope he just made up with her, and she chose not to appear, but I've always wondered if he did something to make sure of it. He sounded pretty confident when he told me she wouldn't be there. I got out of criminal law in a hurry after that. Story 39. Criminal defense attorney recalls 16-year-old client with zero remorse for robbery and abuse. A 16-year-old kid who committed robbery and abuse. He had zero remorse. And it was completely true. The cases involving adults that I was assigned were easier to deal with, since they genuinely were scared of going to jail. This was during an internship in pubic defense in Dominican Republic. Sorry if there's bad translation. But that kid just had this smirk all the time. I felt quite uneasy. In my country, Dominican Republic, you go to juvie either way. He got 5 years total, but the last 3 he would have had served in a normal jail. This was around 2013. So I'm guessing he's out. Story 40. Lawyer deals with client who stabbed a McDonald's employee and was caught with powdered morphine. One of my clients stabbed a McDonald's employee through the drive-thru window, and when he was arrested, they found 4 grams of powdered morphine in his sock. Man tries to hit girlfriend, she blocks with her wine glass, and it smashes in his face. Man goes crazy, beats her up, and smears blood all over her and the house, including writing bitch in his own blood on the garage door. Dude found guilty of assault family violence. Story 41. Defense attorney frustrated by substance dealer client who insists on jury trial despite clear video evidence and priors. I'm a criminal defense guy, so I have had plenty. Most infuriating one was a guy that got busted for selling substances to a confidential informant. The CI was wired for sound and video, so the whole transaction is crystal clear. Plus, the cops eyed his car as the one that drove up the scene, and he was stopped a couple of hours later with the buy money in his possession. Serial numbers were recorded. He had 3 prior convictions for substance sales. The prosecutor offered him 5, which was the mandatory minimum. He absolutely declined to even consider a plea, insisted on a jury trial, insisted on taking the stand and telling a ridiculous story about how it wasn't him in the video. There wasn't any doubt. I felt like Lionel Hurts, trying to string together a closing argument with a straight face. He got 20 years. Story 42. Lawyer stunned when client voluntarily confesses to a robbery police had no suspects for, leading to his own conviction. My client gave a textbook perfect confession to a robbery, and police had no leads on. He had walked into the police station and told the front desk that he thought the cops were looking for him. He then volunteered that he and a friend robbed a gas station last week. Then, after police arrested and warned him, right to silence, etc., and after he spoke at length with counsel, not me, he repeated his confession in an audio/video statement. He wasn't forced or coerced. He hadn't been detained for an unreasonable time in cells first. They hadn't even interrogated him. But as a result of his confession, they were able to get a DNA warrant and matched him to blood swabbed at the scene. And the best part? The police had no idea beforehand that it was him. My client and his friend had covered part of their faces, the surveillance video was horrible quality, and they had bear sprayed the store clerk, a 16-year-old kid, immediately upon entering, so the kid hadn't been able to provide the police with as description beyond 2 males. And since he had no criminal record, he wasn't in the DNA database from previous crimes. He had just heard a rumor that police were investigating, and assumed they knew it was him. I had to laugh when I got the police report and read all of this. I then focused on securing him his fair plea deal, because he had no chance at an acquittal. Story 43 attorney passes on defending a robber, caught on every camera who hid under a bed after the crime. I had to try to defend a man who walked into a convenience store with a knife demanding money. He wore no masks, just his casual clothes, and walked through every aisle before he robbed it, being spotted by every security camera in the store. After the robbery, he ran back to the hotel he was staying at, also carrying an open backpack full of money. Being seen by the hotel's security cameras in the process, he then went into his room, threw the bag on the floor, and hid under a bed until police arrived. I spent a long night thinking about it before passing the case to somebody else, because I have no idea how to defend someone who has so much evidence against them. Story 44 lawyer horrified as elderly client sabotages his own bail hearing by admitting to assault and planning to flee. This isn't my story, but is just too perfect to not mention when one of these threads comes up. So we are at a bail hearing for the client, an older guy in his 70s, accused of assaulting his granddaughter who is in her teens. We are just wrapping up, have made all our arguments that the client is an upstanding member of the local immigrant community, no priors, ECT, and the judge has granted bail with a reasonable bond. All done right? No. The client insists he wants to say a few things. So he stands up and gives his bit that he hadn't mentioned to his lawyer at all, about how he doesn't get why there is all this fuss. He didn't even penetrate her with his penis after all, and she was asking for it with that short skirt. At this point, the judge tries to interrupt this by suggesting that maybe this comment would be better suited for sentencing, but the old guy isn't done digging. He just has to tell everyone how he really doesn't know why people are wasting so much time over all of this, as he is going to fly back to his home country in a couple of days anyway. So yeah, apparently that one didn't go well. Story 45, prosecutor haunted by teen assailant acquitted despite medical evidence and victim's testimony due to jury disbelief. There was also a really sad case where a teenager assaulted a young girl every morning for over a year, and the defense argued a bunch of crap, like the trailer was too narrow for the beds to be arranged the way the girl remembered. It wasn't. Therefore, she was lying. Jury fell for it and found guy not guilty. The sound of the victim's sobbing in the bathroom afterwards still haunts me. This job also destroyed any faith I had in the jury system. We got to talk to them after the verdicts, and JFC juries are stupid. Edit. In the assault case, we had medical evidence of healed tears in addition to the girl's testimony. I am still in disbelief over the verdict, but then in my first trial, I had what I thought was a super clear-cut case of a DWI on camera, with the girl staggering and stumbling and acting visibly intoxicated, and the jury said after that it was a really close decision, and they almost went not guilty because of the defense's arguments. Story 46 lawyer witnesses, clients suffer fatal heart attack in office after police inquire about possible arson on ex-wife's house. Wasn't my case, but a lawyer I worked with had a great story. A client came in to sign his matrimonial property settlement, but was very nervous and sweating profusely while in his office. The lawyer's phone rings, and it's the police asking if he had seen the client. The police inform him that the ex-wife's house is on fire, and they suspect that his client did it, and could he keep him there for questioning. Meanwhile, the client is looking worse and worse, starts shifting in his chair. About 10 seconds later, he had a massive heart attack and died right there in his office. Story 47. Defense attorney fights for reduced sentence in harm case, where client shot a father at a baby shower during a substance-fueled rampage. Not a lawyer, but I sat on a jury for a harm sentencing trial. The guy confessed, and there were 15 witnesses who watched him shoot a young father of 3 at a baby shower while on a substance bender. I'll give his lawyer credit. He earned his fee. I think he was going for a 10-year sentence versus life. He brought in a psychologist explaining how the guy's IQ was so low he couldn't be held responsible. Guy's mom was on the stand crying about how terrible a mother she was and how it was her fault. It almost worked. I had to convince half of the jury to switch their votes to a life sentence. This video does not promote illegal activity. Shared for commentary.